Thank you, Keith. Yeah, so emotional intelligence, what is it? It's your ability to recognize and understand emotions in yourself and others, and to use that awareness to manage behavior and relationships. So in terms of emotional intelligence and utilizing those emotions, you can determine things like the right response. So you have a certain emotion that was triggered. How do I respond to that? Do I respond to it immediately? Do I have to sit on it, think about it? Right time. A lot of the times, if I get like an email and I'm like, ooh, I get that response, I will type out an email separately, so it doesn't accidentally get sent to somebody, and it allows me time to think through that response, and then I end up deleting it at the end. The right person, knowing who your audience is. How are they going to respond to your response? What emotions will, be triggered in them, and understanding that. And then right body language, this is I'm closed, or, folded arms, I'm not listening, versus I'm open, I'm ready to listen to you. What emotional intelligence is not is, being nice, suppressing your emotions because you're afraid of the response you're going to have in those emotions. So you're not dealing with the issue. Giving free rein to emotions, blurting out, not managing yourself, or attempting to be a robot, or being passive or passive-aggressive. So EI, I'll call it, is part of the whole person. So we talk a lot about bringing your whole self to work, right? So IQ, your expertise, is what you bring to work, your knowledge. A lot of us are knowledge workers, right? So that's a key component to what we bring to work. But we also bring our personality, who we are at work. And, obviously we like to be the same outside of work and at work. And EI allows us to make the most of both of those, our expertise and our personality. So managing that allows us to perform better in the workplace. So, why is this all important? Kind of just said it, but basically EI, based on some studies, it's the strongest predictor of workplace performance. 90% of our top performers have a high EI. People with average IQs outperform those that have high IQs. A lot of that has to do with the need for collaboration at work. And folks that have a high emotional intelligence just have that capacity of being able to work with others. And EI is basically a critical factor that sets star performers apart from the rest of the pack. So is it possible to make a decision without emotion? And the answer is basically no, and it's because of our makeup. So I think Stephanie's going to get into that right now.
So yeah, emotional intelligence is really a balance of the rational and emotional brain. So what really separates us from the animals is that we actually can lengthen that space between the stimulus and our response to it. So animals receive a stimulus and automatically they generate that response, and that's really why or how many species can survive on their own immediately after birth by just acting on that instinct immediately. So because humans have that ability to lengthen between stimulus and response, we can choose how we respond. And an emotionally intelligent person can use that to make more effective choices, right? So, Ken was sharing a little bit about how we may react immediately or want to, right? But when we take a moment to step back, those thoughts starts to become more clear, right? And you're able to really think that through and make a choice that you're proud with. So the meat of our presentation really talks about the EI Competency Framework, and it's takes a little bit of personal competence and also social competence. So first we have self-awareness, so understanding yourself and how you function. Self-management is knowing how to manage your own emotions and behaviors. And just as important is the social side of things. So having the social awareness and the ability to understand others, and relationship management, how you manage those relationships with others to come together. So the good news is, if you feel like you're not as strong in some of these areas, they can be developed. And it just takes some work, and it takes some time, and some days are better than others, right? So what we're going to talk through this afternoon is some tips and tricks on how to better your skills. So first off, we have self-awareness. So this is the ability to recognize and understand your own moods, emotions, and drives, as well as their effect on others. So the hallmarks of this is self-confidence, realistic self-assessment, and self-deprecating sense of humor, right? So this is really one of the foundational skills. And when you have this, it makes all of the other skills a whole lot easier to use. So as your self-awareness increases, so does your satisfaction with life, right? Why am I feeling this way? What's important to me, right? And knowing your own personal strengths really helps you know and understand others, and use those strengths to build relationships and have an impact on others. So some ways to increase your self-awareness is embracing feedback. So at times we can get a bit lost, and our intuition tells us we could have handled something better. So it's important to know that we're all learning. We've all made mistakes, right? And seeking out a trusted friend or colleague to ask them for some feedback and talk through a situation. It's important to not wait on those things. It can be really, it takes a lot to put yourself out there, and it's important that you act on that quickly, but also be really mindful that you're in a space to be able to listen and understand that feedback. And it doesn't always mean you need to do something with it right away, but you're asking for it, right? So you want to make things better. And taking some time to set some goals for yourself, right? And asking more questions of, how you could have handled something a little bit differently, and not just asking for generic feedback. You're on a call with someone and you're like, hey, you have any feedback? It's like, no, asked, is there something that I could have done to better communicate this point I was trying to make? Ask some more pointed questions so you get back something juicy that you actually can act upon. And some strategies here are really, Ice Cube saying it here, check yourself, right? So observe the ripple effect of your own emotions. And if something comes up, don't hesitate to just self-reflect on that and reach out to others to go, hey, I took a moment to think how I reacted to that meeting, and I apologize, I shouldn't have handled it that way. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to pay more attention to that in the future. Sometimes situations like that where you have an outburst, it's important to take a moment to revisit your values, to ask yourself, well, why did I get so upset? And was it directed at the right person, right? And in other situations, know what your triggers are and what pushes your buttons. So for me recently, I've been paying attention to a lot as to what has been pushing my buttons and trying to set some boundaries, because I'm not in a place to handle something well, right? So what do I need to do to stop myself so I can think through what that deep down thing was, so I'm not reacting in a way that's emotional and not how I want to portray or make others uncomfortable with that feeling.
Write that one down.
Yeah. And that part about seeking feedback, it's also important to just be protective about what you're letting in and why. You know, as we dig a little bit deeper into this framework, it's important to consider all of those competencies, and sometimes that other person isn't necessarily in a place, or they're reading into something that, you know, it's not all for you, right? It's there to do with it what you choose to do.
The next skill, self-management. So that's the ability to control or redirect disruptive impulses, moods, and basically, you know, think before you act. And, you know, hallmarks, traits of people that know how to self-manage, that they're trustworthy, they have integrity, they're comfortable with ambiguity, so they don't expect things to be black and white. There's a lot of gray out there in the world. And they're open to change, so they're flexible to that, you know, open to feedback, or just, you know, their life has changed and they're able to adapt. So a tip, the uncontrolled emotional outburst, you mentioned that, right? And, you know, basically it's like, okay, you may feel great afterwards, but then, and this has happened to me, I feel all this regret afterwards, you know, like you said, was it directed at the right person? Or, you know, I probably shouldn't outburst to anybody, you know, think through that a little bit. But, you know, especially with folks at work that they don't have a voluntary relationship with you, especially, you know, maybe direct reports or whatever, they're stuck with you, can really have a harmful effect on them and the relationship you have with them. So definitely, you know, try to limit those, not have those at all, and think first. And like you were saying before, Stephanie, it's like if you know you have a trigger, try to protect yourself from that, at least until you learn how to manage it, your response to that trigger. So some strategies. So take control of your self-talk. So I know folks that can talk themselves into a tizzy, right? You're replaying something in your mind that happened, and it just makes you that much more upset. Mm-hmm. And it seems a lot bigger than what it really was. Count to 10. We've heard of that. Smile and laugh more. I got to do that more. And you know, learn a valuable lesson from every person you encounter. So you have all these different interactions that you have with people. What did you learn from them? You know, be open to what they say. There could be feedback. It could be just a passing comment. But there's always something which you can learn about yourself, but also learn about them and how they approach interactions.
Absolutely. So. And just different styles of communication too. I've found, especially in the past several years, just hearing how others explain a situation or help someone else work through an issue. Just different techniques has been really helpful, although I haven't experienced that directly myself, knowing I may in the future, and that was a nice technique that might be helpful to me then as well. So next we have social awareness. So this is more introspective. So the ability to understand the emotions of the people that you deal with. And hallmarks of this are empathy, organizational awareness, and service orientation. So as the first component of social competence, this is more of a foundational skill. So your ability to recognize and understand others' opinions and the emotions that come with them. So it's critical to the quality of your relationships by putting those two things together, putting yourself in that other person's shoes and taking time to really understand their point of view, whether you agree with it or not. That's all what social awareness is all about. It ensures that you stay focused and absorb that critical information, and that's really by listening and observing. Those are the most critical elements. So, you know, some of those things seem like pretty easy, right? You should just be able to not talk, right? And just hear them out, right? But most of us are always already thinking about, well, what am I going to say next? What am I going to do to respond to this, right? It takes a lot of practice to do. And again, going back to what those triggers are, what your values are, it's really important to just take a breath and let them finish all the way through, and take a moment to pick up on those cues as well. So Ken was talking previously about being closed or having an upset look on their face. It could have nothing to do with the conversation that you're having, right? It could be other things going on, and really picking up on, this may not be the time to have this conversation. Let me take a breath and check in with that person, and maybe not in that right moment, right? But talk to them. See if they're doing all right, right? See if there's something that you can do to take a moment and ask them how they're doing, so you can make that connection. So some strategies for social awareness: greeting people by name. So this kind of seems a little silly, right? But it takes a moment to acknowledge that person for who they are, right? And take that moment.
Everyone wants to hear their name.
Right. Watch that body language. So for me, it's a comfort here that I often stand like this, and it's not open, like you said. So taking some time to pay attention to that and make sure that you're open for those conversations. And you could be sharing some really great news, but if your face doesn't show it and you're closed off, it doesn't give that feeling. Live in the moment, practice that art of listening, and step into their shoes.
And I have that trouble too sometimes, where I feel like I have to respond to what they're saying like immediately. So we have this thing at my house. I have 3 daughters and a wife, and they talk really fast, and I feel like I have to keep up with them. But I finally said, it's just causes too much angst for me. So you got to give me a little bit to respond. And sometimes I have to walk away and think through a little bit and come back to the conversation. So it does help.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, relationship management. So this is proactive. Basically managing relationships and building networks, so building bonds with groups of folks. And the ability to find common ground and build some rapport. Oh boy, I'd love to see that in the government. Hallmarks, traits of folks: effectiveness in leading change, which makes sense. Folks are persuasive, and they're service-oriented, so that they're putting other people before them, is what I get from that. So next slide. So relationship management tip. So this is something I learned recently. Basically, interactions with people are more influenced through the emotions of that interaction versus what's actually being said. Which I was like, wow, it's all, me being analytical, it's like what you say is important, but it's that going back and forth, and the ability to identify what that emotion is in the midst of the interaction, and understanding how that emotion influences that interaction is key to effectively manage relationships with other people. So
it's very difficult to flex this skill in times of stress, right? Because that's when it's the most challenging to really think that through and think through that relationship that you have with that other person.
And some relationship management strategies: be open, be curious, ask a lot of questions, take feedback well, be open to the feedback. If you're asking for it, you got to be open to it. It may not be what you expect. That's why it's like I said, brave. It takes a lot. You have to be brave in order to receive feedback. You got to build trust, acknowledge the other person's feelings. I would even say, too, to understand the person's feelings, too, in addition, right? And tackle those tough conversations. Don't let things simmer. Things just get worse. So you got to be able to have some of those tough conversations, nip things in the bud. And remember that the little things are what pack a punch. So you just got to be considerate of everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that feedback piece is important, right? Taking that feedback well is how you react to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that you're in a space to receive that feedback. And again, you don't always have to take all of it in, right? But how you react to it, especially the first time, will let that person know if you're willing to get it again, and whether or not they're actually willing to give it to you when you ask for it again, right? So just being really mindful of
so
that.
don't be doing this when you're hearing it.
Exactly.
All right. And you can actually increase your EI. We were talking about this earlier. You can actually improve, right? So research shows that people improve their EI most when the following conditions are present. So 1, you have to have a strong motivation to learn or change.
You've got to be ready.
Just like anything, right? Developing a new habit, right? You got to practice, right? So practicing those new behaviors consistently. And then seek for feedback on that behavior. Right? So if you're looking to change yourself and you're, hey, I'm going to try this. Well, you need feedback to see how people are responding to that and whether or not that makes sense for you.
Right. And going on that vulnerability note to share with someone that you're working on something, right? And that helps them contribute to that feedback a little bit differently. So speaking of that, as part of this exercise, going through masterminds with our teams, over the past several years, I've been doing a lot of work myself, just growing as a human and as a leader, especially, right? Being a self-starter and an individual contributor for so many years, I really liked working with teams, but leading a team is completely different. And your words become more and more powerful, right? So as we were digging in more here, I found a lot of information on the Harvard Business Review, and one of the things that they have available is basically an assessment for you to do for yourself, and also reach out to others for them to give you feedback. So this takes a lot of bravery, right? And you got to be ready for that change. But it looks at things like emotional self-awareness, positive outlook, emotional self-control, and adaptability, as well as empathy. So what you see here is some of the feedback I got from my husband, as well as some trusted coworkers I have. And what you see in green is how I assess myself, and you can see the differences of how others assess me. So it was just a really revealing exercise, and it's important to hone in on that framework that we spoke about earlier to understand where others may be at in their own emotional intelligence journey as well. And like any feedback, take it for what it is. When I had asked my husband if he would be up for doing this for me, he said, sure, but don't get all in your head about it, right? So like what Ken was saying, don't spin or read too much into it. This is just my view of what I've experienced of you recently, right? Where others may have a different view of you. So I found, at least in that more recent journey, that I spend a lot of time thinking more about how others feel and what they're going to be thinking of, and preparing for that as best as I can, that I don't necessarily take enough time to think about what I'm feeling without that cloud of others' feedback and thoughts, right? So in unplanned conflict at work, I tend to compartmentalize all of that, right? And if I need a break where it doesn't seem appropriate to keep that conversation going, I'll work to stop it and say, hey, I think we need to assess this later. Let's touch base and schedule another meeting. To some people, that can come off as coldness, right? That I don't want to handle those emotions. But most of the time, it's because I just need time to process them, because I'm not in a spot to do that, right? So paying attention to that a little bit more when I do that, and letting people in on it has helped a lot. And then in other situations, I've found that they're triggering to me, right? So if someone's forcing me to make a decision quickly and I don't have time to process it, I shut down because I don't feel like I'm in a good place to do so. Mm-hmm. So taking some time to think about, well, is it just certain decisions, because others I don't have a problem with, right? And seeing what my reaction was, and was it different with one scenario than another? So
explaining that reaction, explaining that behavior to the receiver helps, shape what their perception is of you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or just saying, hey, this, I don't want to get into it, but this is actually why I was upset. It didn't have to do with this, and talk through it more later, which I tend to do. But again, sometimes I wait a little bit long to do that. Other times, some of this feedback was tough to receive, but I will say that when you're going through that peer review, it's important for them to just not send it back to you, right? So each of these people that I asked for them to do this, we had a meeting, and I made sure it was on a day that I was ready to receive the feedback. I wasn't super crazy or stressed out, and we were able to have a really helpful conversation to talk through what was perceived, right? And it gave me a moment to think through, well, why was that? Was it a situation I was in when that story happened that they were sharing, or was it something else? So, I would definitely recommend going through this exercise. If you're interested in getting a copy of the assessment, please just message us and we'll send it along. If you're ready for the change, you can get a lot out of it.
So, how to develop your EI? So number one, define who you are. So you say this all the time, Stephanie, with others, meet them where they are. You got to meet yourself where you are. Define, what your current state is, as we could say. And then define what you want to be. So what is it? What's your goal? What do you want to achieve? And then seek feedback. So, defining who you are, as I said earlier, you may want to get feedback because maybe what you're telling yourself who you are may not be quite accurate. Depends, right? So getting some of that feedback would help with that.
And not having a response to the feedback each time. You just got to listen to it and not have a response back. Absolutely.
And then, of course, as you go and you start changing behaviors and stuff, you want a continuous feedback loop. So identify behaviors you want to keep. How about getting rid of ones you don't want to keep? Is that it? Okay, so we'll do that too. And then identify behaviors you want to develop. And then, I like this, experiment with the new behaviors, So it's that whole, do you want to add 10 behaviors and see what the outcome is? Or do you want to add one, be patient, add one, see what the outcome is, which is the next item. And then you can reflect on that. And then practice, right? So as I said before, it takes, a month to develop a new habit, right? These are habits, these behaviors, right? So you got to practice and continue.
So where do you go from here? So again, definitely would recommend going in and filling out that survey assessment. And as Ken was noting, just pick one skill to work on. Is there one that's especially weak, or even one that you feel is strong, but you really want to make it stronger, right? You get a lot of feedback and you're able to build those relationships more closely. And then focus in on those strategies to begin executing and developing that skill. It's really important to choose a mentor as well, and this doesn't need to be your professional mentor either. It could be someone that has a particular strength in one of those quadrants that we spoke about, and you want to take some time to pick their brain and see how they got to that place, right? Was it always who they were? Did they go through a journey? Is there something that you can learn from them? And then, while you're going through this journey, just remember, just like everything else, expect that you'll have some successes, but it's not going to be perfect, right? We're all flawed individuals, hopefully evolving for the better, right? And this is a big part of that. And one technique may work for one scenario, it may not the other, and it's just important to practice and be patient with that progress. So that's all we have for this afternoon. We thank you all for joining us. We hope that you got something out of this discussion, and we're looking for your feedback as well to see if there's something that we could do better the next time around. Here we have a plug for our Infor HCM Road Mapping Festival coming at the end of February. I'm so excited for this. We have some VIP road mapping sessions, hands-on training, a bunch of featured speakers and breakout sessions, letting you in on diving into some of our sandboxes. And if you know RPI, you know we have lots of fun activities planned as well.
Jam-packed.
Yeah. And then Ken, do you want to share about our boot camp?
Oh yeah, so we have a Cloud Suite boot camp in Tampa, in our Tampa office, starting January 24th for a few days. Basically reviewing the overall architecture of the system, user management, technical stuff, reporting, what have you. So a lot there that you can get within 3 days, and we jam-pack a bunch of content that you can learn a lot quicker, in this type of form.
Mm-hmm.